At the beginning of the AD 160s, the Roman Empire was in the middle of the high days of the Pax Romana. As we saw in the last episode, Rome was now ruled by two emperors, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. The military was strong and active, fighting a war against the Parthians and winning. There was no reason to suspect that things were about to change. On the next couple of episodes, we are going to look at the beginning of the end of the Pax Romana, focusing especially on the role of disease. It's my contention that the world's first pandemic struck the Roman Empire around the year AD 165, and we are going to talk about it on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 50, the world's first pandemic. Listeners, thanks for enduring a week away. Had a vacation in smoke-filled Eastern Oregon, celebrated my 20th anniversary, and had a great time with family and friends. I want to alert you to an online talk that I'll be giving once again with Smithsonian Associates, and it will cover Agrippina, the Empress, mother of Nero, one of the most fascinating women in Roman history. It will be live 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, August 14th. So go ahead and search for my name and Smithsonian Associates, or you can look for The Rise and Fall of Agrippina, Empress of Rome, Mother of Nero, which is the title of the talk, and you can find a link to get tickets to that talk. I'll take questions at the end. It'll be a fun time. And if you want a refresher on Agrippina, check out episodes 16, 17, and 18 of this podcast. Those episodes were a lot of fun to record, and they remain very, very popular with listeners. So go ahead and check those out too, in addition to the Smithsonian talk, and of course, today's episode as well. So let's go ahead and get started. On the last episode, I mentioned that Lucius Verus never set his feet into Parthian territory. He stuck around in Antioch, drinking, hunting, going on vacation, sleeping around. He did manage to get married to Marcus Aurelius's teenage daughter, cementing the relationship between Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius, Rome's first pair of co-emperors. But Lucius's troops, led by a man named Avidius Cassius, were in Parthia, and they were having great success by the year AD 165. The war had turned in favor of the Romans. Avidius Cassius marched the Roman army down the Euphrates River, sacked the city of Seleucia and also Ctesiphon. Ancient accounts of this phase of the war claim that this is when Roman soldiers first ran into a terrible disease. That Lucius Verus couldn't control his troops during the rampage of the cities, and the soldiers ransacked a shrine of Apollo, and for this sacrilege, the entire Roman Empire was punished with a pandemic. That story is almost certainly made up. We can't even confirm that the cities of Parthia were in the midst of some kind of epidemic, although there is some evidence that they were, just scattered accounts, a statue of Apollo, a dedication to Lucius Verus. There are a few small signs that suggest there was a disease there. I detail all of this evidence, by the way, in my new book on the Antonine plague, Pax Romana, the plague that shook the Roman world, which was published by Princeton University Press earlier this year. But whether the soldiers actually caught the disease in Parthia or they caught it somewhere else, we just don't really know. It was deadly and it was fast spreading, but the Romans had no idea what the disease was. Historians have long thought that it was some variant of smallpox, and every so often there's an article claiming to definitively either prove that it was smallpox or prove that it wasn't smallpox. My own view is that it almost certainly wasn't modern smallpox, because we do have some pretty good DNA evidence suggesting that smallpox is only about 500 years old, but viruses very similar to smallpox have emerged and re-emerged numerous times in the past. And the symptoms of this disease that we now call the Antonine plague do have some similarities to smallpox. What kind of symptoms are we talking about? Well, the physician Galen, who was the personal physician of Marcus Aurelius and later his son Commodus, mentions a few. 1, a fever that could last as long as a week, diarrhea, bloody stool, foul breath, insomnia, and then the thing that historians get really excited about, which is Galen says that some victims of this disease developed a dry pustular rash a week or so after they first began to show the initial symptoms. And Galen uses terms for pustules, not buboes. So we don't think it's bubonic plague. He even hints that there was scarring left over for the victims that survived this rashy pustular disease. And again, all of that sounds a lot like a pox virus of some kind, not smallpox, but maybe something close to it. But that's really all we know, apart from the fact that many people died and that it spread in many parts of the Roman Empire. We don't know much more than that. It sounds like it was a disease that the Romans had never encountered before and that they were really quite scared of it. It flared up, especially in cities and in military camps. We don't have too many accounts of what it was like to endure an epidemic of this disease. We know that one of the first cities in the Roman Empire that it struck was actually the city of Rome itself. But the source for that outbreak is not particularly good. It's the Augustan history, which is written several centuries later. Many of the stories in the Augustan history have since been proven false. So we have to take this description with a grain of salt. But what the account tells us is still pretty jarring. The Parthian War had been finished. Lucius and his army came back to the city of Rome. They celebrate a triumphal parade in October. Obviously, this parade would have included soldiers that came back from Parthia. Maybe some of them were infected with this disease. And of course, then a bunch of people in Rome, maybe more than 100,000 people, would have crowded into the forum to watch the spectacle. So we have what we now call a super spreader event in the city of Rome. And then the source tells us that a couple of weeks later, all hell broke loose in the city. There were bodies piled in the streets, and the emperors had to figure out how to deal with the massive number of corpses. They paid for body collectors to move through and rid the city of cadavers. They also had to pass laws restricting where corpses could be buried because the corpses were such a problem that people were just throwing them anywhere, even those of their loved ones. The other thing that the emperors did, according to our account of the epidemic in Rome, and this was in 166 AD, is that Marcus and Lucius decided to hold memorial services for the large number of citizens that died, and the most elite of the victims of the plague were given statues. What I find interesting about this is it's clear that Marcus and Lucius couldn't stop the disease, but they could at least remind the city that a pestilence was no excuse for civility to break down, that bodies should still be honored, and that humanity should be respected. And we have some corroborating evidence to show that at least some of this account is true. There are legal codices that were assembled a few centuries later of various proclamations of emperors. They were all collected into volumes by emperors of the Byzantine Empire. And among those laws are a series of actions by Marcus and Lucius Verus instituting restrictions on where bodies could be buried. So we do have some evidence that that is true. We also have some interesting evidence from coinage. One of the largest hoards of Roman silver coins ever found covers coinage produced during this period. That hoard has over 80,000 coins in it. And so any given year, there are several hundred coins in that hoard. And what's interesting is that for the coins that were found in that hoard that were produced in each year of the AD 160s, there was a huge drop in the coins produced in AD 167, which would be the year immediately following this epidemic. And that suggests to me that the mint at Rome suffered, probably along with a lot of other industries in Rome, either the loss of workers to death or just the general shutdown of the city due to a plague. Now, that shutdown wouldn't have been by fiat. This was not a lockdown or anything like that. However long the plague raged in the city, maybe a month or two, just the regular business of the city could not be carried out, and that obviously included the minting of coins. The other firsthand account of the disease that we have is far more reliable, and this one is from Galen, the physician. Galen actually left Rome ahead of that first epidemic in AD 166, and he went back to where he was from, which is Asia Minor. But Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus had plans for a war in Germany due to changes in climate, which would be quite significant in the history of the Roman Empire. The more nomadic peoples that lived to the north of the Roman Empire across the Danube and Rhine rivers, they were having a lot of trouble with the increasingly cold and dry climate in Northern Europe. And so they began to push against Rome's borders, crossing the rivers, pillaging Roman cities, and causing a general nuisance. And so Marcus and Lucius decided to act. They were delayed by the Antonine plague in Rome. They were initially going to fight the Germans in 166, but whatever happened with the plague was so bad that they ended up waiting a couple of years. So in 168, they finally ramp up the war effort again, and they collect their soldiers in the northern Italian city of Aquileia. And both emperors go there as well. Some of those soldiers had served in Parthia, but many of them were new recruits that were pulled from Italy and other parts of the Roman Empire, and they were all crowded into this tiny city. Galen, too, was summoned to the city to be with Marcus Aurelius. And he finally made his way there by the end of 168, and he writes an account of what happened. And I just want to go ahead and quote exactly what he says. It's pretty interesting. Quote, "On my arrival in Aquileia, there was an outbreak of the plague, which caused destruction on a scale previously unknown. The emperors immediately fled to Rome with a small force of men. For the rest of us, survival became very difficult over a long period. The majority, in fact, died." That's from Galen's work On My Own Books. Galen's comments are fascinating because they show just how terrifying this plague was. The first time Marcus and Lucius encountered this plague in Rome, they engaged in this pro-social behavior, passing laws, providing for memorial services for the victims. This time, they did not hang out in the city while the plague went through. They just got out of there as quickly as they could. They even left poor Galen behind. And he actually sounds a little bit bitter in the account of what happened. Now, Galen says that a majority of people in the city died. Maybe they did. They could have died of the disease only. They might have died of the disease and then other factors as well. We don't really know. But this, again, delayed the war with the Germans. But that wasn't all. Another tragedy struck the Roman Empire, and Galen, if we finish the account, says what it was. Quote, "Lucius Verus himself departed this world on his way back to Rome." So the plague was raging in Rome and Italy. The war against the Germans continued to be delayed, allowing these invaders to have their way along Rome's northern border. And then Lucius Verus himself, Marcus Aurelius's adoptive brother, son-in-law, and co-emperor, the emperor responsible for leading the Roman army, was dead. We don't know if Lucius Verus died of the Antonine plague. Galen doesn't say that specifically. He just connects the death of Lucius to his account of the Antonine plague. And so historians to this day still don't know why he died. But not having the exact truth of what happened doesn't stop historians from speculating, and it probably did not stop Romans from speculating either. There were probably rumors flying through the capital and throughout the empire that this disease was so bad that it could even kill a sitting emperor. And at this point, if people weren't afraid, they must have begun to panic. And it's around this time that we see a full-blown hysteria take over numerous cities of the Roman Empire. And as we know from our own recent experience of pandemic disease, sometimes hysteria and fear can create problems that are even worse than an already deadly disease. And we'll talk about what happened in the Roman Empire's Age of Angst on the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocor. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.